I'm a 32-year-old woman married to my husband, Chris, who's 34. And then there's Linda, my mother-in-law, also known as the third person in my marriage. Linda is known by almost everyone who meets her as someone with opinions. Lots of opinions, really. At first, it felt like she just cared a lot. I was genuinely impressed by her energy and attention to every detail, from planning family gatherings to giving me tips on how to make Chris's favorite dishes. But that was at the start of our relationship, and I figured these quirks were just her way of showing affection. That was definitely wishful thinking. One of our first major clashes happened over something as trivial as home decor. I had recently redecorated our living room, nothing huge, just some new curtains and a couple of pieces I found that I thought would make the place feel a little more us. Linda came over and made a face as soon as she stepped inside. The next words out of her mouth, "Oh, I didn't realize you were making all these changes. This doesn't feel like a home for my son." She walked over to the new artwork I had hung up, inspecting it with this look, like it was some massive insult to her. Before I could even respond, she started pulling ideas from thin air, suggesting different pieces and arrangements she thought would feel more right. It wasn't just her saying she didn't like it. She made it seem like I had committed a personal offense. Chris tried to calm things down by suggesting we all sit down and have a drink, but he couldn't resist adding, "Mom's just trying to help." There it was, his standard response, as if her barging in and judging every little decision was somehow an act of kindness. But this was just a sample of what was to come. I'm talking about the full experience that followed, where Linda seemed to be on a mission to remind me that she had been in Chris's life long before I came around and frankly wasn't going anywhere. The flashbacks hit hardest around our wedding. I still remember when I thought choosing my dress would be this magical experience. But instead, Linda turned it into a project of her own. She had suggestions for everything, from my dress style to the color of the flowers. When I finally settled on a dress, she had the audacity to tell me, "I would have thought you'd pick something more timeless." That sentence burned, but again, Chris was quick with his standby. She just wants the best for us. My friends warned me even back then. They'd say, "You sure you're ready for a lifetime of Linda?" They weren't exactly joking, but I didn't listen, thinking things would settle after we got married. They didn't. In fact, they escalated. Without even asking, Linda took it upon herself to organize a few family gatherings at our home. Not like, "Hey, I was thinking of having a get-together. Would that be okay?" No. She would just inform me, "We're having dinner here on Friday," as if it was already decided. Chris saw this as her being considerate since we didn't have to go anywhere, while I saw it as a complete lack of respect. The thing is, it's not just my home, it's my finances too. Or at least it should have been. Somehow, Linda convinced Chris to put her on one of our joint accounts as a safeguard, according to her. I discovered this by accident one day when I saw her name on a bank statement. She didn't just have access, she had been using it to buy things, supposedly on behalf of the family. I thought Chris would have my back on this one, but to him it was just another instance of her helping out. I couldn't even get him to see how much this bothered me. There's this pressure that started building up in other areas too. Linda would subtly suggest that Chris spend more time with his side of the family, and soon enough, he was doing exactly that. My family became more like an afterthought for us. He'd say it wasn't a big deal, that we were still seeing everyone, but it was clear Linda had her influence. And then came the day she decided to overstep at my workplace. She called my office to give advice on my work schedule, saying she was just making sure everything was running smoothly. I can't even describe how mortifying it was when my manager pulled me aside to ask why my mother-in-law was involved in my work life. When I told Chris, he shrugged and said, "She's just looking out for you." It was beyond embarrassing. It felt like an invasion of privacy that he just couldn't or wouldn't see. One evening, I thought I'd finally get some quiet time with Chris. I'd set up a small dinner at home for just the two of us, a rare chance to reconnect and unwind. And guess who showed up? Completely unannounced. Just as we were about to eat, Linda walked in, declaring she didn't want to intrude but figured she'd join us anyway. I could feel my patience slipping, but any hint of frustration only led to Chris saying, "She's just trying to be close to us." Close? At this rate, she might as well have moved in. And that's when I realized something had to give. This wasn't just her trying to be helpful. My marriage was becoming something that seemed more like a power struggle between me and Linda. I started feeling like a visitor in my own life, watching as someone else called the shots while I got sidelined. I'm sharing this now because I need to know if I'm overreacting. Chris keeps telling me I am, and it's starting to get to me. But deep down, I think this isn't how things should be. Update 1. After that night Linda showed up at our private dinner, it was like a switch had flipped. I couldn't keep holding my breath, waiting for her next intrusion or Chris's next excuse. So I decided to confront him directly. We sat down, and I told Chris that if he didn't put clear boundaries in place with his mother, I couldn't see how our marriage would work. At first he looked surprised, then defensive. He claimed I was blowing things out of proportion, repeating the same old line that Linda was only trying to help. I didn't even recognize who he was siding with anymore. I suggested maybe we should try couples therapy to get a neutral perspective on everything, and after a long silence, he finally agreed, though it was clear he wasn't thrilled. A few days later, I found out Linda had heard about the therapy. She practically scoffed, suggesting I was high maintenance and that the therapy was unnecessary. To make things worse, she decided to take matters into her own hands by inviting my parents over, without telling me, to talk some sense into me. My parents, thankfully, saw right through it and defended me. They were shocked at Linda's constant interference and promised they had my back. A week passed, and I thought maybe things would calm down. Then one day, while cleaning up, I realized something felt off in my bedroom. It hit me when I opened my bedside drawer to grab something, and everything had been moved around. Later, Linda mentioned she had needed something from our room and decided to go through my things. Just the thought of her digging through my personal stuff made my skin crawl. I mentioned it to Chris, expecting him to understand, but once again, he dismissed it as her just trying to be helpful. But it got worse. One afternoon, I was looking through our financials and I noticed a large sum was missing from our joint savings account. When I asked Chris about it, he mentioned Linda had suggested a family investment. Apparently, they had both decided to use the money without consulting me. It felt like I was watching a stranger make huge decisions about my life without even a heads up. My friends, hearing all this, started pushing me to set firmer boundaries. They saw how much it was affecting me and tried to give me the support Chris wasn't offering. Still, Chris held firm, saying that if I tried harder to get along with Linda, things would improve. Then out of nowhere, Linda began feigning illness, claiming my attacks were stressing her out. This was the excuse she used to lure Chris over to her place more frequently. He'd spend nights at her house, creating an even bigger distance between us. This growing divide led to the moment I dreaded but knew was coming. One night, I laid out my final ultimatum. Chris had to choose. He could either be my husband or his mother's enabler, but he couldn't be both. He looked at me, almost hurt, and said he couldn't be forced into making a decision like that. That was when I realized just how deep Linda's grip on him was. I felt cornered, unsure of what else I could do to get through to him. So, I took to Reddit, desperate for advice. I laid out everything, Linda's constant interference, Chris's excuses, and all the ways it had escalated. I asked people if I was overreacting, hoping someone would tell me how to fix things. Update 2. After laying it all out on Reddit, the responses came pouring in, and they weren't subtle. People were blunt. Chris's behavior wouldn't change unless he faced real consequences. So after mulling it over, I decided to take a step back. I packed a few essentials and went to stay with a friend for a while, hoping that a little distance might make Chris see what he stood to lose. Not even a day later, Linda went into full-blown damage control mode. She started spreading the story that I had abandoned Chris, turning it into some dramatic tale of desertion. Apparently, she was telling everyone in the family that I had just walked out, leaving Chris devastated. According to her, I was the unstable one, and she was the dutiful mother trying to pick up the pieces. As if that wasn't enough, Chris's siblings reached out, thinking they could mediate and bring us back together. They invited us both over to one of their homes for a calm discussion, and despite my better judgment, I agreed. Maybe if his family heard me out, they'd realize how overbearing Linda was being. When we got there, though, Linda was ready. The moment the conversation began, she twisted every incident, claiming I had misinterpreted her good intentions as interference. She even threw in a few tears, painting herself as a misunderstood mother who only wanted to help her son. With every word, it was like she was bending reality to suit her story. And Chris sat there, silent, not saying a thing to defend me. I left that mediation feeling more alone than ever. It became clear that if I wanted support, I'd have to find it elsewhere. So I started going to therapy alone. In those sessions, I found some clarity. My therapist encouraged me to set firmer boundaries and to stand by them no matter how much pushback I got from Chris or Linda. That gave me a new resolve. I knew I wasn't crazy or overreacting. Linda's grip on Chris had gone beyond what anyone would consider normal. And then Linda found a new weapon, social media. Suddenly, she was posting subtle digs and veiled comments, implying that I was unstable and unpredictable. She would leave vague statuses, like some people need to learn respect, with a dozen dramatic emojis. Of course, her friends and family members were quick to sympathize, leaving supportive comments that only added to her victim narrative. It was draining to watch, but I tried to ignore it, hoping it would fizzle out on its own. However, Linda's meddling didn't stop there. One morning, my boss called me into her office with a serious look. She had received a strange message from someone claiming to be concerned about my well-being. It didn't take much to figure out who it was, Linda. She had actually contacted my workplace, hinting that I might be having a mental health crisis. My boss assured me that she didn't believe a word of it, but she warned me to be cautious since Linda's interference was putting my professional reputation at risk. When I told Chris about the incident, he looked uncomfortable, muttering an apology for his mother's behavior, but stopping short of doing anything about it. That was it. I laid down a renewed ultimatum clear as day. I told him that if he didn't draw boundaries with his mother, I would be filing for separation. I needed to see that he was willing to stand up to her, not just say he would handle it when things got out of hand. A few days after that ultimatum, Linda pulled another stunt. She showed up at my workplace, this time in person. She demanded to speak with me, causing a small scene in the lobby as she loudly claimed that I wasn't listening to reason. It was humiliating. The receptionist had to call security to escort her out, but the damage was done. My colleagues saw the whole thing, and it only added to the drama she was creating around me. At that point, I realized that things might go beyond a temporary break. I started looking into my options and consulted a lawyer to understand what separation would look like if it came to that. The lawyer confirmed that I had a right to protect my finances and property, given how entwined Linda had become in every aspect of our lives. It was a sobering conversation, but also one that grounded me. This wasn't just about dealing with an overbearing mother-in-law, it was about safeguarding my future. Of course, Linda wasn't done. When she got wind of my legal consultation, she pushed Chris to take protective measures for what she called family assets, clearly viewing me as a threat. I was barely able to process how quickly things were escalating. It felt surreal. As if on cue, my friends rallied around me, staging a mini intervention. They reminded me that I had tried everything possible to make this work, and that there was no shame in walking away from a situation that was wearing me down. Their support was a lifeline, especially when Linda attempted a false apology. She asked to meet me, claiming she wanted to clear the air, but it didn't take long for her so-called apology to shift into blaming me for the family's issues. Then Chris finally reached out with a request to give him time to manage Linda. He assured me that he'd start setting boundaries if I would only be patient with him. But I was running out of patience. I posted an update on Reddit to vent, detailing everything that had happened since my last post. This time, the response was overwhelming. Thousands of people poured in with messages of support, sharing similar stories and urging me to take control. It was validating in a way I hadn't expected. These people didn't just sympathize, they understood. Update 3. After that last Reddit post, the support I got was a real wake-up call. I had put so much time and energy into trying to keep things together, but the truth was that nothing was going to change if I didn't take a serious stand. So I decided it was time to make a move. I went ahead and filed for legal separation. I didn't give Chris a warning or a heads up this time, just filed the papers and sent them his way. Chris's reaction was exactly what I expected, pure shock. He came to me, asking if I was serious, like he didn't think I'd ever go through with it. But I was done waiting around for him to take action. As soon as he realized I wasn't backing down, Linda stepped in. She didn't waste any time. Almost immediately, she hired her own lawyer, claiming she needed to protect family assets from me, as if I were the one threatening their finances. To her, I was no longer her son's wife, I was the enemy. And just like that, the manipulation started again. Chris tried everything, telling me I was giving up too easily, but he didn't understand why I'd go this far. He tried to shift all the blame onto me, making it sound like I was the one tearing the family apart. When that didn't work, he got Linda involved, and together, they went on a mission to block me out completely. I was removed from every family chat, kept out of any updates or news. Suddenly, I was an outsider, and Linda made sure to keep it that way. Still, Chris wasn't entirely ready to let go. He reached out one night, saying he wanted to make things work, claiming he was working on setting boundaries with his mother. He practically begged me to give him another chance, promising he'd change, but he couldn't bring himself to actually confront Linda or make any meaningful change. His words meant nothing without action, and I'd already heard enough empty promises. Then I stumbled across something that made my blood run cold. While going through some of our financials, I discovered a series of secret bank accounts. They were in Chris's name, but Linda's signature was all over them. They'd been moving money around, hiding it from me, and Linda had access to every single account. There it was in black and white. They were actively cutting me out of everything, as if I was already gone. As if that wasn't enough, Linda decided to start spreading rumors about me. She told everyone that I had been unfaithful, trying to paint me as someone who was never committed to the marriage. People I'd known for years started looking at me differently, whispering behind my back, questioning my character. Linda's lies were relentless, and she was determined to ruin my reputation. It all came to a head at a family gathering that I had somehow managed to get invited to, despite Linda's best efforts. I went, thinking I could set the record straight, but the moment I walked in, Linda made a scene. She loudly accused me of abandoning the family, making it seem like I was the one who had walked away from everything. The looks on people's faces were a mix of pity and judgment, and for the first time, I felt completely humiliated. Afterward, Chris approached me, telling me he didn't realize how much his actions had hurt me. But when I asked him if he'd cut ties with Linda to prove he was serious, he backed off. He couldn't do it. He wanted things to go back to the way they were, without making any real sacrifices. As heart-wrenching as it was, I knew I couldn't stay in that kind of environment. My lawyer was a godsend during all of this, making sure Linda couldn't get her hands on my personal assets or finances. With my lawyer's support, I started to feel more secure. My friends were there every step of the way, reminding me of my worth, and that I didn't have to put up with this treatment. Meanwhile, my story on Reddit continued to blow up. Thousands of people were reading my updates, and the messages I received were overwhelming. People shared their own stories, their own struggles with toxic family members, and it was amazing to see how much my story resonated. Knowing that my journey was helping others gave me the strength I needed to keep moving forward. Finally, Chris reached his breaking point. He told me he was ready to distance himself from Linda, if it meant I'd consider reconciliation. But by then, it was too little, too late. I told him plainly that I wasn't interested in a relationship that came with conditions. I needed someone who would choose me without hesitation, and it was clear that he couldn't do that. So, I officially filed for divorce. That decision brought a strange kind of peace. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my life again. This chapter was finally closing, and as painful as it had been, I was ready to let it go. Update 4. Once I filed for divorce, it felt like I could finally start building a life of my own, away from all the noise. I found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't much, but it was mine, someplace where I could breathe without constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting Linda to pop up, or hearing another excuse from Chris. I moved in and slowly started setting up my own space, one that actually felt like home. Linda, of course, wasn't ready to let things go. She decided to get petty, sending a series of threatening letters through her lawyer, claiming I had damaged family property or abandoned marital obligations. But my lawyer saw right through it. Each threat was dealt with as quickly as it came in, and soon enough, Linda ran out of steam. Her attempts to control me from afar just weren't working, and the silence was blissful. With Linda finally out of the picture, I could focus on healing. I continued therapy, which became a huge part of my new routine. Those sessions helped me untangle all the mental knots Linda and Chris had left behind, and with each passing week, it felt like I was letting go of years of emotional baggage. I didn't realize just how much of myself I'd buried until I started digging it back up. It was a long process, but bit by bit, I felt lighter. My friends were my lifeline during this time. They decided to throw me a freedom party in my new place, complete with a toxic-free banner and balloons. It was the first real celebration I'd had in years where I felt entirely surrounded by people who had my back. We laughed, ate, and shared stories, and that night became a turning point for me. For the first time, I realized just how much love and support I had around me, something I'd almost forgotten while being so wrapped up in the drama with Chris and Linda. At work, things started looking up, too. Without Linda meddling and creating chaos, I could finally focus, and my boss noticed. My efforts were recognized with a new project that opened up more opportunities. Slowly but surely, my reputation began to recover, and my confidence grew. It was like a domino effect. As I started feeling better about myself, every other area of my life seemed to fall into place. And then one afternoon, Chris showed up at my door. He looked different, almost nervous, like he didn't belong in this part of my life anymore. He told me he'd finally cut ties with Linda, that he realized how much she'd meddled and how deeply it had hurt me. He asked for a second chance, claiming he'd do whatever it took to make things right. But as he spoke, I realized something I hadn't expected. I didn't feel anything. The connection I'd once clung to so desperately was gone. He was like a stranger standing in my doorway, and I told him I was done. My story had been gaining traction online all this time, with so many people following along and offering encouragement. Each time I posted, I received countless messages from others who had been through similar situations, thanking me for sharing and reminding me that I wasn't alone. The support was incredible, and knowing my story was helping others made me feel like this whole experience had a purpose. Linda, however, wasn't handling my newfound independence well. One day, someone sent me a screenshot of a post she'd made online, ranting about me ruining her family and manipulating Chris. The post was filled with so much venom, but instead of anger, all I felt was a sense of relief that I was no longer caught in her web. I didn't respond directly, but when others asked about it, I calmly shared my side of the story, laying out the facts. People saw through her antics, and eventually she became a joke in her own circle. Watching her unravel like that was closure I hadn't anticipated. A few weeks later, Chris sent a message apologizing, this time with real remorse. He admitted he'd been blinded by loyalty to his mother, and that he finally understood the damage it had done to our marriage. I thanked him for the apology, but that was as far as it went. I'd moved on, and there was no going back. As I settled into my new life, I began dating casually. For the first time in years, I was able to go out without feeling weighed down by someone else's expectations. I met new people who respected my independence and supported my journey, and it was refreshing to see a future that wasn't tied to old pain. Linda tried reaching out once, leaving a voicemail saying she wanted to make amends, but I knew better than to reopen that door. I blocked her number, setting the final boundary I needed to keep my peace. This was my life now, and I wasn't going to let her or anyone else disrupt it. As I looked back on the journey, I couldn't help but feel proud of how far I'd come. I'd learned so much about myself and what I was capable of, and I felt stronger than ever. Sharing my experience online had connected me to a community I never knew existed, and the encouragement I received kept me going during some of the hardest moments. In my last post, I reflected on everything I'd learned, encouraging others to stand up for themselves and prioritize their own well-being. The messages of support and gratitude poured in, and I closed that chapter of my life with a feeling of gratitude. I was finally free, and the future was mine to shape however I wanted. Update 5. Once I had officially cut ties with both Chris and Linda, my life began to feel lighter. It was a strange, refreshing feeling waking up every day without the weight of their expectations and drama. I realized how much of myself I had set aside just to keep the peace, and now I finally had the space to figure out who I was outside of that marriage. To rediscover myself, I decided to pick up old hobbies I'd let slip over the years. Painting was the first thing I turned to. I set up a small art corner in my apartment, and for the first time in years, let myself get lost in colors, textures, and creativity. Each painting felt like reclaiming a part of me that had been hidden away. I also started hiking again, a passion I'd set aside during my relationship. Walking through the trails, surrounded by nature, brought me a sense of calm and fulfillment I hadn't felt in years. Therapy continued to play a big part in my journey. My therapist and I dove deeper, exploring why I had tolerated so much and what I could do to prevent similar patterns in the future. These sessions helped me prioritize my own needs and set healthy boundaries. Slowly, I could feel myself becoming stronger, creating a solid foundation for future relationships. My career took off too. Without the constant disruptions from Linda and the emotional strain from my marriage, I could finally focus. My boss noticed my hard work, and not long after, I was promoted to a senior position. It was a proud moment, a recognition of my abilities and resilience. I was building a new future on my terms, and it felt incredible. To support my progress, I joined a local support group for people who had dealt with controlling or toxic family dynamics. Hearing others share their stories was like finding a long-lost community. I wasn't alone in my experiences, and being part of that group gave me even more strength to move forward. Each week, we shared our victories and setbacks, and slowly I started feeling more grounded and secure in my decisions. My friendships deepened during this time. My friends had been there for me through the chaos, and now they were here to celebrate each small victory. They encouraged me to appreciate every step forward, whether it was a work achievement, a new painting, or even just a peaceful day. They'd been my true support system all along, and I finally realized how much I had in them. Then, unexpectedly, Chris reached out. He explained that he'd been going to therapy and wanted to apologize sincerely for not standing up for me. He admitted he'd underestimated the impact his mother had on our marriage, and confessed that he hadn't fully understood her manipulations until I left. Apparently, he'd even moved out and was trying to create a life of his own, away from Linda's control. It was a surprising moment, and while I appreciated his honesty, I knew that chapter was closed. I had moved past the idea of us being together. Chris's growth was something I respected, but I no longer felt the connection we once had. For me, that part of my life was finished, and I had no desire to revisit it. Linda, however, couldn't quite let go. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd tried reaching out one last time, supposedly to apologize. She even left a voicemail, but I decided not to respond. I'd learned that some people will always try to reel you back in, and it was up to me to keep my boundaries intact. I blocked her number, knowing I owed her nothing. As I continued moving forward, I started dating casually. I met someone who was kind, supportive, and respected my independence. He didn't try to control me or fit me into his world. Instead, he valued my journey and admired the strength it took to walk away from a toxic situation. Spending time with him felt different, like a fresh start without the baggage. On Reddit, my story continued to reach others, sparking discussions and encouragement from people who had been in similar situations. My inbox filled with messages from readers who found strength in my updates, telling me how my journey had inspired them to set boundaries in their own lives. It was heartwarming to know that by sharing my story, I was helping others find their voices. Reconnecting with my family was another unexpected blessing. During my marriage, I'd often felt isolated, partly because of Linda's influence and partly because of my own struggles. But now I reached out more often, rekindling relationships and realizing just how much support I'd overlooked. My family welcomed me back with open arms, reminding me that I was never truly alone. To Chris this new chapter, I decided to write a letter to my younger self. I acknowledged the challenges I had faced and reminded myself of my worth, resilience, and capacity for growth. I told my younger self that she didn't have to settle for conditional love, and that prioritizing herself was the best decision she'd ever make. The letter felt like a final goodbye to the past, a reminder of everything I had overcome and the strength I had gained along the way. In my final update on Reddit, I shared this journey of rediscovery and growth, expressing my gratitude to the community that had supported me every step of the way. I closed with a message of hope, encouraging anyone going through similar struggles to trust themselves and know that it's possible to rebuild, to move on, and to find joy on the other side. I felt ready to embrace the future with a heart full of gratitude, strength, and a determination to live a life that truly belonged to me.